We are blessed today to have two Medal of Honor recipients. They will explain a little bit of what that means. This is going to be an interactive session, and so when they ask you for questions, you will have the opportunity to stand, and Mr. Hoffius will bring you a microphone, and you'll be able to ask questions. I think you also understand not only is this a special event, it's a very honorable event. So our behavior needs to be honorable, out of respect and out of appreciation. And it's my honor as principal of Har-Ber High School to welcome to our stage today these two Medal of Honor recipients. One served in Afghanistan and one served in Vietnam. If you've been in either Dr. Colvin or Mr. Fontenopoulos' or Mr. Peterson's or Mr. Stewart's class, or I could list the whole list, but I would forget one. You have had conversations and are having conversations currently about those wars. So if you would, politely welcome Mr. Will Swinson and Mr. Sammy Davis as they come to talk to you today.
Hello. I have a 17-page speech that I can read to you, or we can have question and answer, which means you will ask us any question that's in your heart, and we will open up our hearts and let you look in. Which would you prefer, the 17-page speech or the question and answer? 17-page speech? We got you.
Well, unfortunately for y'all, the dog ate my speech, so we're going to stick with the question and answer. Well, I'll just start off. My name's Will Swinson. I'm with the United States Army, and I was, until 2 days ago, the most recent recipient of this award, the Medal of Honor.
Cool.
The Medal of Honor, for those of you who do not know, it is the highest award that this nation can bestow upon any citizen or service member. And it is an enormous honor and an enormous responsibility. To give you some context, right now we only have 76 living recipients of the Medal of Honor, and that is spanning from World
history.
War II, Korea, Vietnam, and the current battles in Iraq and Afghanistan. 76 living. So the numbers are small. This award is handed out not lightly, but with significant consideration, and very rarely due to the uniqueness of circumstances. So what myself and Mr. Davis represent is a very small community, but what we also represent is the entirety of our armed services. We are essentially ambassadors for what each and every single service member who serves in our military today is capable of. Indeed. And we are representatives of that.
Indeed.
So a little context about myself. The action that earned me this award was in Afghanistan in 2009. I was working as an advisor to the Afghan border police. These are not the guys who make you take off your shoes at the airport. They're a little bit different. They're the guys who fight on the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan and keep their country safe. We can go into this later, but it was a bad day. A lot of good people lost their lives. I lost 4 Marines and 1 Army soldier, along with 10 Afghan troops that were all doing the same job, the same mission, to give them an opportunity that they could not give themselves on their own, to make a better Afghanistan. But it's what got me here today, so we can talk about that some more.
How many of you here seen the movie Forrest Gump? Most of you. Excellent. In the movie Forrest Gump, when the president's putting the Medal of Honor around Forrest's neck, remember that scene? That's me. I am the real Forrest Gump. They just threw with computers, they took my face off and put Tom's face on it. Forrest's citation is based on my actual citation. The rest of the movie, lightly, and I do express lightly, touches my life. And the only similarities between Jenny and my wife Dixie is that I love Dixie as much as Forrest loved Jenny. There's no other similarities. Which means she didn't do drugs and sell my medal. But in the movie Forrest Gump, they did not involve the river, but I've swim across the river to bring back 3 of my brothers that were caught and wounded on the other side. I did for my brothers what I knew they would do for me. It had very little to do with me being big, bad, and brave, but it did have everything to do with the love that I had in my heart for my brothers. And that's what gives you the physical and the mental strength to do things that some think is unaccomplishable, is the love in your heart for your fellow man. Hua? Hua is Army speak for do you concur, do you understand? And properly, when I say hua, if you understand what I have said, your proper response is hua back. Hua? Fast learners. Hua. First question. And we will answer any question that you have, except where the secret fishing hole is. And I'll take you there, but I'll have to blindfold you. So, right here. Yes, sir. Stand up, sir, so we can hear you, please.
What are your brothers' names?
My brothers?
What are your brothers' names?
My sibling brothers, or the brothers that I served with?
Your brothers that you served with, that you saved?
Yes, sir. Billy Ray Crawford from Alvin, Texas. Gwendell Holloway from Stockton, California. Jim Deister from Salina, Kansas are the 3 men that I swam across the river for. Yes, sir.
Well, unfortunately, we did not get to save as many people as we would have liked. We had to do a recovery mission. We had lost a number of our Marines, and that was Lieutenant Johnson, Sergeant Johnson, Corpsman Layton, and Sergeant Kennefick. And then one of my soldiers, Sergeant First Class Westbrook, he later died of wounds that he received on the battlefield. And then there were a number of Afghans who, though committed to our mission, unfortunately I don't have their names.
Cool. Next question. Yes, ma'am. And we're passing the microphone to you so everyone can hear. That's why we're doing that, ma'am.
Okay. Hi. What was your family's responses whenever you told them you wanted to serve your country?
My family's response when I told them I wanted to serve my country. I remember that very well. I joined when I was still a senior in high school when I joined. And when I came home and told my parents that I'm going to join the Army, my mama cried and my daddy said, "Son, I'm proud of you." That's about normal response, I think. Will?
I think I come from a different part of the country, so I'm coming from Seattle, Washington, and my family does not have a military tradition. So when I just said I was joining up, first there was abject disbelief,
So
and there was
both of them
laughter, and then there was just sort of blank stares because they had never really met anybody who had served in the military. It was a foreign concept to them, and it was in many ways a foreign concept to me too. But that's the thing that's so unique about the military, is you don't need to come from a military town, or you don't need to come from a military family, or you don't need to have some sort of background which bequeaths you with the ability to be a soldier.
And you
sailor,
meet
airman,
people
or
from
Marine.
all walks of life.
You meet people, indeed. It is an absolute representation of our nation. And so for me, I was met with disbelief. But later on in my career, they now understand. They always have supported, even more so now. And again, not coming from a military background, I've helped educate them on what being a soldier is, what being a service member is, and what sacrifice is, and what truly makes a nation. And a lot of that is service. And service oftentimes is found in the military.
There are many ways to serve your country, and being in the military is one of them. Next question. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for standing up so we can see where to send the microphone.
What motivated you to become servicemen?
What motivated us to become servicemen? Well, for my instance, my grandfathers on both sides had been in the military. My father had been in World War II. My three older brothers, my oldest brother had been in Korea. Next brother had been in the Berlin crisis. Next brother joined just after the Berlin crisis. And when Vietnam came along, it was my turn to go do my job for my country. And that's the reason why I wanted to join the military. Actually, I was working in a bowling alley, senior in high school, working 6 nights a week from 4 in the evening until midnight, 6 nights a week. My senior year of high school, I started getting really serious about ladies. I understood that they smelled better than boys. And I realized very quickly that you had to have money in your pocket to be able to do the things that ladies enjoy, so you have to have a job. So I went out and got a job, and it was 6 nights a week, 4 to midnight. And the irony of it was that then I didn't have the time to go out and be with the ladies, but I learned a lot of lessons. Run a snack bar in a bowling alley. I did the cooking and dishwashing and whatever they needed, and we had a television. And just after Christmas, 1965, Roger Donlin, he was the first living Medal of Honor recipient from Vietnam, flashed on the television, was Roger Donlin's Medal of Honor ceremony. And I'm standing there watching it, and Roger's standing there just looking so proud, and the president's putting the Medal of Honor around his neck. And I said, wow, when I grew up, I would like to be a soldier like him. And there was actually 6, counting myself. We went down within a week, and all of us joined the military. All of us joined the Army. Whoop.
My reasons were a little bit different. I took a different route. We all have decision points in our lives. I understand that next year a lot of you will be at a decision point as you leave high school on what to do next, and some of you may choose the military. For me, I chose university, and as I was finishing up my schooling and I had to start realizing at some point I have to pay the bills on my own, I was looking to what I wanted to do in the future. And at that time, I was thinking the State Department was where I wanted to go. It's where my heart was. I wanted to work overseas. I wanted to work in government service. I knew I wanted to work and serve in some way, shape, or form, but at that time, the State Department looked like the best route for me. And I had done some independent travel overseas, and I had seen what we had been doing overseas, helping out, at that time, our Balkan friends. There was a lot of trouble out in former Yugoslavia, and I saw firsthand what that looked like and who was assisting. And at the time, I didn't put much thought into it, but the people who were really out there doing their job, doing the mission, were guys in green. It was the U.S. Army. They were part of the stabilization force out there, and they were actually out there helping to provide security. They were actually out there helping to find bad guys. They were actually out there helping communities rebuild. And that stuck with me. So when it was time for me to graduate school and move on to my next course in life, I realized I could spend 3 years in the State Department stamping passports, working my way up through the food chain, or I could listen to what the recruiter said. And are there any recruiters in the room? All right. Half of what they tell you is lies. The other half is true, and a lot of that is up to you. If they tell you that you're
Let's not call them lies. Let's call them false promises.
false promises, but they're not false promises because you can make them
They're
come
lies.
true. If they tell you you're going to be Rambo, well, you know what? It's up to you if you want to become Rambo. So if it's a lie, if you don't become Rambo, it's probably your fault. Anyway, that movie was loosely based on me, so yeah.
I believe that.
So I listened to the recruiter. And there I was. I found myself rapidly in the military, in a different world, in a different environment, but still serving. And I still serve to this day. So something worked out. Half the lies came true. The other half we're still working on them. And I'm proud of every day of my service.
Cool. If you have a question, don't be shy.
You got one. You got two. Oh, they're popping up all over the place.
Okay.
You got three. We'll get to you in the back. You're not being ignored.
Definitely.
And this does go on your permanent record, so if you raise your hand, there's a gold star that goes on your name in that private file.
Yes, sir.
So what was your time through basic like?
My time through basic training,
Yeah.
the most enjoyable portion of my life. I should be a recruiter, right? Basic training. My brothers had told me about basic training. When I had joined January of 1966, I was still in high school. Because of the influx of people coming in, they did not have a position open to come. I couldn't actually physically go into the Army until September 28th. So I had several months. So I went to work in the oil field after I graduated from high school, and it was very physical. And I had played as much sports as I could, and I was always been very active. When I went to basic training, my drill sergeant would run backwards in front of us. And he would, now I can't say exactly how, in the same language that my drill sergeant would use, but he said, if any of you weak-minded boys think that you can come up and run backwards with me in front of all the rest of the troops, you're more than welcome to. And I got out and ran backwards with him, and it was because in my job, one of my jobs in the oil field, we were pulling the rods, which is the pump that's way down, 7,000 foot down in the ground. There's a pump down there, and it's operated by the pump jack going up and down, and it's connected with these rods. Well, you have to pull all the rods out to get to the pump to repair it, and that was my job. So you pull them up with a machine, and then you put them on your shoulder, and you run backwards. And you run up, and we got paid by the job. So the more jobs during the day that you could do, the more money you made. And I was making real good money, but my running mechanism was working extremely good, and that's how I could keep up with drill sergeant. And it just angered him unbelievably that I could do these things, as well as he could. The result was that when I thought my drill sergeant hated me, I mean truly, because he was always rah, 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 right in my face. When we were getting ready to graduate, he called me into his he slept in the same barracks that we did, and he called me into his little room. He had a desk, and there was a bottle of whiskey sitting on the desk. And he said, "Private Davis, I would like for you to have a drink with me." And I'm thinking, yeah, this is part of the test, because you don't drink. That night I was not old enough to drink. And I said, "Oh, no, thank you, sir. I don't drink whiskey." And he said, "No, son, sit down. I would like to have a talk with you." And just the demeanor in his body and his voice convinced me that he really wanted me to sit down and talk to him. And he poured me just a little bit in the bottom of a glass. And we sat there and we sipped that. And he said, "The reason I have been harder on you than all of the rest of the troops is because I recognized almost immediately that you had more physical capabilities than most of the kids coming in at that point of basic training. And I wanted to expand on it." And he did, because he asked me and encouraged me to do things that even I didn't think my body or mind could do. But he's one of the first people in the military that taught me that you don't lose until you quit trying. So my basic training was an eye-opening experience in many, many ways. And that old drill sergeant was invited when I was awarded the Medal of Honor. Francisco Quinones was there with me, physically at the White House. Who?
So I think the only commonality between our basic training experiences was that our drill sergeants didn't like us. They didn't offer me whiskey. So what's interesting about basic training is it is your first introduction into the military, and you do run around, you do wear green, you do shoot guns, and you have terrible haircuts, and it's kind of a strange experience.
And throw hand grenades.
And you do throw hand grenades too. Some people throw it poorly, and that's kind of interesting to watch. But what's really interesting about it is you're taking people from across the nation, from across cultures, from across economic lines, and you're bringing them together to be a team. And what's fascinating about that is we don't give the Army enough credit for this. They are taking the fabric of our nation, they're putting it into a small confined space. They're turning the heat up, they're turning the pressure up, and they're seeing what happens. And they have a very short period of time to do this in, because sometimes it's time of war, and the next place these people are going to be is team members on a battlefield supporting one another.
Brothers.
And you're taking some kid straight out of the Bronx and putting him right next to some kid from Mississippi. They don't know the first thing about one another.
That speaks a different language in many ways.
And oftentimes, the thing is, sometimes they do speak a second language, third language, fourth language before they get
somebody
to English.
from the Bronx speaks English, somebody from southern Alabama speaks English, but you can't understand each other.
Well, Mr. Davis is from southern Illinois, so I actually have difficulty understanding him. But nevertheless, it's about team building. It's about working as a team and ultimately working as a nation. And that's not something I identified when I was there. I was mostly just being yelled at and running around in circles and doing push-ups because I was in trouble for this, that, and the other thing. But when you walk away from that experience, you do learn something. You learn how to be a team, and you learn what a country is, and you learn about the diversity of our nation and how it is one nation. As much as you think we're divided, when you come together in an environment like that, it's one team. So, bad haircuts, incredible experience.
Cool. What do we got?
And we had 3 or 4 people in the back of the room that were looking for that gold star.
Yes, sir.
What was the intensity you felt when going into the war zone?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, sir.
What was the intensity you felt when going into the war zone?
I'll let you have that one. What was the intensity of us going into a war zone?
In 3D and full sensational experience as well.
No matter how well you have been trained to do your job, the first few, well, I can't even say the first few times because you have that sensation in your heart every time you go into a combat area when all this is happening. But that's what's there. You know, you want to go, but you cannot. So what you rely upon is the training that has brought you to that point. And because of the quality of training that I had received, I knew what to do. And that's all I prayed to the one above. Sir, just let me do my job. And he did. And I did.
I don't have as good of a singing voice. War is an experience like no other because it's not what you see in the movies. They take the choicest bits and they stuff that into the 2-hour reel, and that's what you see. War is actually quite tedious. It's quite boring. It's long periods of time before anything interesting happens. And sometimes you can predict it, sometimes you can't. But in the boredom, you have to rely on your training to keep you out of that sense of complacency. Because when that complacency is broken and somebody starts shooting at you, things change really quickly. And with that training, it's interesting what happens. If you're trained appropriately, if you have the right mental attitude for where you're at, what you're doing, and what the objective is, there's a lot of screaming in your head, but at the same time, there's a lot of calm because you just react. You know how to react. Everything is automatic. Everything is muscle memory.
You know how to do your job.
And you don't have a lot of time to think about rationalizing what you're doing or rationalizing why you're there or thinking about the politics of it. Really, it comes down to completing the mission, protecting the guys to your left and to your right, and doing the job the best you can. And that doesn't require a lot of thought. It's automatic. But then there is that noise in your head that sounds just like that.
Next question.
Excuse me, what was the most memorable moment you had during the war?
What was the most memorable moment we had during the war? Well, I've had many memorable moments in war. Many memorable moments. I think one of the things that always sticks in my heart and my mind, you see these young men that are big, bad, and brave, and in holding them with their last breath, every one of them, their last word was "Mama." And that's what I remember. You know, here you're holding your brother that you love with all your heart, and his last words was to his mother. It was by chance that your experience in any of the men? I mean, that's one of the things that sticks in my heart, that I can remember looking down in their faces and remembering the last word that they said, and that will forever be in my heart.
We'll leave it with that.
Cool. Next question.
If you don't mind me asking, and if you don't mind disclosing, will you give us a description of what happened in the scene of what really won you the medal and what was going through your head at that exact moment?
Well, my action was 2009 in Afghanistan, in the eastern part of Afghanistan, which is up in the mountains. It looks kind of like Utah, maybe Colorado. It's a feisty little area, and the inhabitants of that area are unique. They're Pashtuns, and they just basically don't like anyone but themselves. So they're difficult to work with. What I was doing at that time, as I mentioned, I was an advisor to the Afghan border police. So I didn't really lead my troops so much as I mentored them and gave them advice on how best to perform their job, which was providing security for their country. And I went along with them to kind of provide them that extra motivation. On this day, what we were trying to do is specifically work with a particularly feisty part of the province I worked in, this one valley that was notorious for not liking anybody. They didn't like the Russians, they didn't like the Afghan government, they didn't like the Taliban, they didn't like us, they just don't like anybody, which is fine. That's their prerogative. Unfortunately, they kept shooting at us. So they became a larger problem. They represented a larger problem. And what we had been doing for about a month was working with this village with what we call non-kinetic effects, which means we were reaching out to them just to talk. Sometimes that's as silly as sitting down having tea for days on end and seeing where we can go with the conversation. We were helping them out with school supplies, things like that, trying to integrate them in with the politics of their area, get them integrated in with the government. But unfortunately, they had a negative influencing element that needed to be taken care of. There were just simply people who were not going to let this village do what they ultimately wanted to do, which is become part of greater Afghanistan. That's where the money was, that's where the security was, that's where the prosperity was going to be. So that required us going in, and we started a multi-phased operation to go in and start actually providing security. And for us, that was having Afghans go into Afghan villages and provide Afghans the presence of their government. Very few Americans went in. It was probably 30 Afghans to every one US soldier. And we'd been doing this for a couple of missions. And one thing about working in Afghanistan is they're very honest people. You'll sit down with them, they'll have tea, and they'll say, "Thank you for coming, let's have a nice chat, but on the way out, we're going to shoot at you." And you both agree that this is what's going to happen, and it's okay, it's nothing personal, it's just business. And you have tea, you thank everyone, they're very gracious hosts, and then when you leave, they give you about 500 meters, and then they start shooting at you. It's awkward. And we very much expected this to be the case as always. I'd been there for a year, and this has been pretty much the constant reception that we had received. The problem was we were making significant gains with this one village, and it represented a greater threat in terms of what the enemy was losing than what we were gaining. The enemy saw this as the last village to turn friendly, at least to the U.S. side, to the Afghan side. And on that day we went in, and it was an Afghan Army-led operation, and they were advised by the U.S. Marine Corps. And my guys were in a supporting role, and I was their advisor. And when we went in that day, we encountered an enemy that was significantly larger than we had expected, primarily because the enemy had decided that we were representing a significant threat to them. So for the same reason we saw this village as important, they saw it as important. So they rallied their forces, and we ended up encountering a significantly larger element, and better trained element than we expected. There were also some mistakes made on the U.S. side. The best way I can describe it is if we're driving a car and it's a team effort, one person's steering, one person hits the brakes, one person hits the gas, but you all have to work as a team. But if you come up to a corner going fast and somebody's not there to hit the brakes for you, it's a bad day. And so we had a pretty bad day. So my action on that battlefield, the Marine Corps, as I said, they were leading the operation. Their commander was wounded, their sergeant major was wounded. Pretty much the entire command element for the Afghan forces was killed. And that left me as the senior person on the battlefield. So I took the reins of the battlefield, I took the reins of leadership, and myself and 4 other Americans, we pretty much single-handedly rallied the Afghan forces to rise up and conduct a counterattack. So myself, Fabio Adalamo, Dakota Meyer, Rodriguez Chavez, we started doing recovery missions to pick up our fallen Marines. We didn't know where they were. This all happened over the course of 6 hours. We had lost contact with 4 Marines and a significant number of Afghans, and it was just a bad day. And about hour 5, we finally found our fallen Marines. They had all been killed. It was an unfortunate situation. They'd been fighting valiantly down to the last bullet, last man, but that's how we found them. And so to earn this award, there's no specific criteria. There are things that people look for. There has to be 2 sworn statements to support every act of valor. There has to be something that sets you apart from your colleagues. But you can never really put your finger on what that is. You can never really determine what it was that got you to be put in for this award. But if there's one constant, it's that none of us ever wanted to be put in for this award. None of us want the responsibility of having this award because it represents sacrifice. It represents the efforts of soldiers on that battlefield and on other battlefields that weren't recognized the same way. But for some reason or another, somebody saw you do something, and in this case, they saw me, they saw Mr. Davis do something on that battlefield that got us nominated for this award. And whether we like it or not, we're now the recipients of it. We now harbor the responsibility to protect it, to preserve it, and also to pass on to people like you the understanding that this award really belongs to the entire military. Because not everyone gets that chance to be seen. Not everyone gets that chance to truly rise to their potential. War is unfair. Some people don't make it very far in war. Others do. There's no rhyme or reason to it. But we stand here with the responsibility of this award, and we can talk about our individual acts. But really what we like to talk about are the acts that every single soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine do on behalf of our nation, on behalf of you, every single day. They do it without accolades, they do it without thanks, but this is just one battle amongst many. You don't hear about the other battles because they don't have people who walk off that battlefield to get awarded this medal, but they're out there, and we can't differentiate what we did from anything else that our peers did, but nevertheless, we are where we are. So
November 1967, the North Vietnamese army in previous years, in trying to come down and take control of Saigon, the provincial capital, they had tried coming in directly from the north, from the east, from the west in previous years, and none of them had been successful because of the U.S. military presence. And in 1968, now this was November of 67, and Tet is first part of the year, they were going to come down through Cambodia and go all the way to the southernmost portion of South Vietnam and come across through the Plain of Reeds and then move directly north up into Saigon. And that was the plan. Well, the 9th Infantry Division that I was part of, that was our area of operation, was the southernmost portion of Vietnam. And when our intel people started seeing large amounts of North Vietnamese coming into the area, well, our job was to push them back into Cambodia. So we started doing our job. I was artillery, and the artilleryman's job is to provide close and continuous support of the infantry, which means if the infantry gets into a firefight and they need support, they need help, they get on the radio and give us the grid coordinates, and we fire the artillery round in to help push the enemy back away from our men. They picked us up by helicopter, Chinook, which is the big twin-bladed helicopters with the howitzer slung underneath, and we had 4 helicopters, 4 guns, and took us out in the middle of the jungle and set us down in a clearing not a lot bigger than this room. And we started, the second that they popped the cable and set us down, we started firing because our infantry was being overwhelmed by North Vietnamese. And we fired as fast as we could load the howitzer all day, from 8 o'clock in the morning until just a little after 4 in the afternoon. I mean, we literally fired as fast as we could load the piece. When they finally broke contact and we were able to quit firing, well, we had this mess of the 105 howitzer has it's a big round and has like a 22 case, except they're this long and that big around. And each gun had fired over 1,000 rounds. So we had big piles of casings all around us, and we'd been firing a charge 5. There are 7 bags of powder, big bags of powder, that make up the charge for a 105 howitzer. And we'd been firing a charge 5 all day, which meant for every round that we fired, there were 2 bags of powder left, and they just happened to be the biggest bags. Well, normally, you don't let the powder stack get much higher than your knee, and you light it, and it just burns very intensely. It doesn't blow up, it just burns very intensely for a few seconds, and it's all over. But because of the intensity of that day, we had not been able to do it. Each gun had stacks of powder around it that was 7-8 foot tall, which is a tremendous amount of powder. So when they broke contact a little after 4, we started trying to square the area away, get the canisters. Actually, we were throwing them in. I was set up right on the river. The tube of my gun was like hanging over the riverbank. And we're getting everything squared away. At 5 o'clock, a Huey helicopter came in and landed, one of ours. And the major got out and he said, "Your probability of getting hit tonight is 100%. Well, we got hit 3 or 4 times a week. You know, I mean, we at least that much. We didn't understand why he was coming in to tell us that we were going to get hit tonight. Well, what he meant was that he had flown over a reinforced North Vietnamese Army battalion. That's 1,500 men. It was a heavy weapons battalion that was about 3 kilometers from our position, and they were headed directly towards us. So we prepared ourselves as well as you can, and everything remained peaceful and calm, and we were firing the artillery in normal fire. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the enemy attacked us, and they started off with a mortar attack, and the mortar attack lasted a half an hour exactly. The mortars were just raining down all over us, and then the mortars quit exactly at 2:30. And we kind of looked at each other, and you know, usually you get a few rounds in. They just wanted to keep you awake at night. And for the mortars to be this intense and to last exactly a half an hour was kind of unique. And we're looking at each other, and then from across the river, which the river was about as wide as this room, from across the river, we heard the enemy shouting in English, "GI, tonight you die," or "kill the GI." You know, it was several different ways of saying "tonight you die." You know, and that caused us great concern. Then they started mass assault waves. Well, there were only 42 artillerymen there. Now, we did have some infantry that had been posted around us that were to secure our position, but we didn't know where they were. And we could not fire a beehive round. A beehive round is an anti-personnel round that has 8,000 little darts in it. They look like little darts. They're 1.125 long and diameter of a pencil lead and 4 little fins on it. But we couldn't fire that because we didn't know where our men were. the infantry that had been across the river. So our radio people were trying to correspond with their radio people, find out where we're. Now, in the meantime, there's 1,500 people shooting at us. I mean, can you imagine that? You try to make yourself very, very small beside your howitzer because you're standing there, you've got the gun loaded and you're ready to fire, but you can't. Finally, we got clearance that said everything is clear, and I was the man that actually pulled the cord that fired the piece. And when I fired that first round, the enemy had set up a rocket on the other side of the, well, what was the, not an M40, shoulder-fired rocket. A law. No, it wasn't a law either. That's a RPG, thank you, rocket-propelled grenade. And he fired that at my muzzle blast. Sometimes when you get old, your mind just has gaps in it. Will keeps accusing me that I was in the Civil War. But when I fired the piece, they fired at my muzzle blast. And it didn't hit the muzzle, it hit the little shield. The 105 howitzer has little shields on the side of it, and I was trying to hide behind the shield, and it hit the shield that I was hiding behind. It hit 8 inches from my head, which is the reason why I'm, or one of the reasons anyway, and it blew me off the gun, knocked me unconscious, blew me into my foxhole, which was about 6-8 feet away. I remember waking up, and I'm laying flat in the bottom of my foxhole. I could not hear nothing. It was stone quiet, but I could see all these pretty lights, red, white, blue, and green lights all over the sky. And as I'm laying there enjoying the lights, then my head started clearing. What had happened, the explosion had caused traumatic brain injury. And I'm laying there, and as I could hear again. I could hear the gunfire, rat, tat, 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 and I could hear the explosions of the mortars going off, and some other artillery, one of our other guns was still working, and they were firing. And then I start realizing, well, where am I? In my mind, just seconds ago, I fired the howitzer, which it had actually been about 20 minutes to a half an hour. I'd laid there in the foxhole unconscious. And, well, where am I at? Well, I raised up on one elbow. Our foxholes were only 18 inches deep because you can't, as my sergeant told me, you cannot lift your head up out of 18 inches of water, and we were in water. So you dig your foxhole 18 inches deep. And as I lifted my head up, and I looked across the river, and the enemy was doing mass assault waves, 150 to 200 at a time were coming across the river, which in the most part was about this deep. But just before my bank, there was a deep trough, and they'd be running, and they'd just disappear, but immediately come right back up again and then come up the bank. And I said, wow, well, I've got to do my job. So I started doing my job as a soldier. I'd run out of amps, fired all of my ammunition out of the M16, fired all the ammunition out of an M60 machine gun, and still they just kept coming. I thought I was in a bad dream. I thought I was in a nightmare because I had never seen anything like this. Realizing now, I understand that it was part of the traumatic brain injury, which caused it to seem dreamlike. But I kept doing my job. I seen one of my GIs, one of my brothers across the river, Gwendell Holloway from Stockton, California, stood up and waved his boonie hat, and he said, "Don't shoot, I'm a GI." And he was about 70 yards on the other side of the riverbank, and it just crushed my heart to think that I had been firing at my brother. And I said, well, I've got to go get him. So because by this point I'd been shot in the right thigh with an AK-47. My back was broke because the howitzer had rolled over my body and broke my ribs, broke my back. I had beehives in my kidney. Where was Forrest wounded? I had about 30 beehive from my mid-thigh up to and including my 4th lumbar vertebra, which is my buttocks. And I was burnt because the howitzer was burning, and I still would try to put it out and fire it. But I knew that I had to go get my brother, so I got a piece of air mattress, and I blew it up and tied it off to where there was no bullet holes. And I had a section of air mattress about this big that still held air. And I slipped off into the water, went across the river, stashed the air mattress, worked my way back to where I'd last seen Wendell. And when I arrived at the foxhole, there were 3 men in it instead of just one. It had taken me about 45 minutes to make that trip because the enemy was still doing their job. They were still doing mass assault waves, 150, 200 at a time would come running right over me, and I would just lay there like I was dead, and they'd run right over me. I didn't think I had the strength to make 3 trips, carrying 1 man at a time back across. So I asked the man above to give me the strength to carry all 3 of my brothers at one time. So with a broken back and bullet in my leg, and I pulled Jim Deister. Jim had been shot in the head and had been shot in the chest, and we thought he was dead. I pulled Jim up across to my shoulders with his head laying over here and 1 leg on each side of my arm. Billy Ray and Gwendell. Billy Ray had lost just below his knee. Leg was gone, and Gwendell had put a tourniquet on it. And Gwendell had been shot, a quartering shot through here. It had missed his spine, but it came out in his tenderloin. And he had a big hole in his head, but he was still doing fair. So Billy Ray, Gwendell, Jim laying across my back, and away we went. Gwendell still had 3 clips of ammunition. So while I still had ammunition, when the enemy would do the mass assault wave, I would do my job as a soldier. We finally made it to the riverbank. I took Jim Deister across first, came back, got the other 2 men, got them across. When we got back, they told me that, well, Deister's dead. And I said, yeah, I know. We gave them medical attention, each other medical attention as much as we could. I crawled back and helped. We had 2 guns that were still functioning until the enemy broke contact about 8 in the morning. That's when the helicopter came in to start flying off with our wounded and our dead. There were 12 of us left standing out of the 42 that had started the evening. And it was the other 12 men that put me in for this medal. And although I still in my heart know that I didn't do anything brave, I simply done for my brothers what I knew they would have done for me. That's not being brave. That just meant I loved my brother. You would do the same for me. So that's how I received my medal. And that's one of the reasons why I'm still doing my job. This medal doesn't belong to me. It belongs to my men in Vietnam that I served with from Vietnam, and it belongs to you. And if you don't feel a part of this, it truly has less value. Thank you very much. And in addition to the story, Jim Deister was not dead. When they put him, I loaded him on the helicopter that next morning with our dead, and the medic on board the helicopter seen a bubble come up out of the chest wound that Jim had, and took his pulse, and he had a heartbeat of about 25 beats a minute, which is very slow. And they started giving him fluids. Jim Deister is alive and well today, lives in Salina, Kansas. When he had his first granddaughter, he called and said, Sam, do you think you could be here? We got in the truck, drove all night, got there before it got daylight, and went to the hospital. Jim was waiting downstairs, and we pulled in. My wife and I went up to the maternity room, and his daughter had just had the baby. She was just all cleaned up, laying on mama's tummy, and we walked in, and she handed the baby to Jim, and Jim turned around and handed her to me. and knowing that this precious little girl would not be here if I had not done my job is one of those things that will forever be, that feeling will forever be in my heart. Hua.
Patriotism is a tough one because these are terms, these are ideas, these are concepts you can't put your finger on. You can't truly tangibly explain.
It's not just one thing.
It's not just one thing. Patriotism is a representation of what you believe. But it's also patriotism is something that we all collectively understand as a value. And when you have a nation like the United States of America, when you have a nation that's been forged in combat, forged in battle, forged with people who have fought for freedom, patriotism for us is that freedom. It's that ideal. And we recognize our patriotism in many different ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a big flag in the back of your Ford F-150 pickup truck on 44-inch tires. It can be done in any manner of different ways. But that is certainly one way to do it. Don't get me wrong. In fact, as an anecdotal story, I remember one Special Forces team early on in the Afghan war, they had a big old American flag on the back of their Humvee, and they drove back and forth through this town saying, please shoot at us. Shoot at us. This is your chance. Do it.
Cool.
Here it is. Nobody shot at them. They understood. That's a bad call. These guys are serious. But patriotism is taking the opportunities that are provided to you, maximizing your potential, living your dream, and being free. That's patriotism. That's part of being in America. So you can recognize that patriotism in a number of different ways. But ultimately, it's following your dreams and achieving them because you have the freedom to do it here. And you reaching those dreams, you reaching those goals, that in itself is patriotism. So keep pursuing your dreams.
And that's part of our dream for you, is to have that patriotism. How are we doing on time, sir? 2 minutes. One more question. Yes, sir. Cool.
Well, I think the military has changed significantly from the Vietnam era to today.
Certainly.
For one thing, it's purely a professional military force. We don't draft anymore, and everyone who serves is there voluntarily.
Is there because that's where they want to be.
And as a professional military, they can be choosy. And as the military is going to get smaller over the next few years, they're going to be demanding more out of each person who applies. And I do joke, your permanent record's not quite as permanent as some people let you believe, but if you're going into the armed forces, that is your permanent record. And you need to start thinking clearly about what you want to achieve, because right now, the positive things you do in life contribute towards your profession, towards your career in the military. But the things you do wrong hold you back. The decisions you make today, it may not seem like there are consequences, but there can be. There can be. And in the military, it's not a fair organization. In fact, it's very blunt. And so you need to make sure that you're A, the best potential soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine that you can be, and B, live up to those ideals starting today, because that's what's going to be expected of you. Not to mention it's absolute.
I wish we had 2 more hours.
I do too. I wish we had 2 more hours. I do. Har-Ber High School, I think you need to show these gentlemen an appropriate response before we dismiss.
They did a good job.
I'm proud of him. The young man is a Christian student. Almost nonverbal, so the fact that you said something is impressive. I regret it, but thank you for your response. We appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Everybody learned something from
They absolutely did, and that's what I did. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, because of our pride in you, we're going to extend lunch today to make sure everyone has plenty of time to eat. And so as you dismiss from this facility orderly, you will be allowed to be in lunch until further notice. And I think that it's going to be just about 50 minutes, almost quite an hour. And then when we finish lunch, we'll return to our fifth period class. So thank you again. And at this time, if we could, teachers, if you could help us dismiss, some out the back, some to the side, we will reassemble a fifth period.